thank you so much for making the time to be on Flute Unscripted.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm super excited. I've been following your podcast actually from the very beginning.
Oh, wow, very honored. And now full circle, you're here.
I know.
I saw that you recently became a US citizen. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. That was a long 13-year process. But
Wow.
we're there in the end. We actually applied for our passports last Wednesday. So we're
How do you
anxiously
feel?
waiting for our new blue travel books in the mail.
Oh, yeah. Do you feel different?
You know, I kind of do actually.
Really?
Yeah, it's funny. Like I didn't feel different when I turned 21 or, like any other major life milestone didn't really affect me. But this does kind of actually feel different. It feels a little more like with the South African passport, there's a lot of restrictions, especially in terms of travel, which I think a lot of US citizens don't necessarily know about. If I wanted to go anywhere in the world, which I tend to travel quite a bit before the pandemic, it becomes tricky because you have to go to that country's consulate, apply for a visa, and it's all this paperwork that you have to find, and it's a real pain. So it feels sort of freeing in a way that I have a passport now that I can travel anywhere and everywhere I want to. Most places.
Right. Do you go back to South Africa often? Does it feel like home now here?
Yeah, so we've been living here since 2007 in Massachusetts for the last 4 years. So we always have a plan to go back to South Africa every other summer. Mm-hmm. We were supposed to go last summer. That didn't pan out. So I think we're going to go for a really long stretch next summer. I think we're sort of going to do like a 2-month trip, just to catch up with anybody and everybody that wants to see us, I guess.
Well, it sounds like it'll be a lot of fun. I mean, what is it like now to have roots in Massachusetts, teaching there at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst? And can you talk about kind of how you got here? So your start in South Africa and your path to where you are today.
Yeah. So I'm so thankful for the experience that I had for multiple reasons growing up in South Africa. But one of them is for the professional experience that I was sort of afforded or given from a very young age, because there are fewer professional flute players. So opportunities just came a little bit easier, So by the time I graduated with my undergraduate degree and moved to the US, there were things I felt like I needed to catch up on, like technical facility and sound control and things like that. But then sort of professional experience, I really thought that I had sort of like a leg up to some of my peers, which I was really incredibly grateful for, because what's the saying? You can't buy experience, and yeah, so by the time I moved to the US, that would make me 21, 22. I've subbed and played principal all the way down to piccolo with all the professional orchestras, or most of them, in South Africa. Just had a bunch of chamber music experience, which and with my students now, I find that it's hard for them to get that, and especially too, when you're applying for an orchestra job, or it's hard to pad the resume. So I was really, really thankful for that. And so I came, but with that said, it also felt very limiting, and so I always had this idea of moving to the US. And then I went to the Jeannie Baxter International Masterclasses in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon. And that's where I met Christina Jennings, my teacher at CU Boulder. And so in 2007,
for just a little bit of time.
Yeah.
You did your master's and you went on with her too.
Yeah, I did my master's and DMA at CU Boulder. We just really worked well together, and I actually spoke with her on the phone today. Like
nice.
Yeah, I'm really thankful to have her as a mentor, and that I can call her up and ask for advice if I need it. yeah, so I did my master's in 3 years at CU Boulder, took a year off. I went back for my DMA, graduated in 2014. In all that time, I was just sort of freelancing in Denver and subbed with the Colorado Symphony. In that time, I became principal flute with Boulder Chamber Orchestra. Also was part of, or still am, we just don't have any concerts on the books right now, the Antero Winds, which is a professional woodwind quintet that used to have a residency with the Aspen Music Festival. That was wonderful. Yeah, so I was just sort of freelancing, going to school, working, just doing my thing in Colorado. And then as the usual, I always knew I wanted to be a college teacher versus a orchestral musician. And that was, yeah, that was always very clear to me, that path. And because I really do love teaching. I love performing too, but there's sort of that intimacy around teaching that I really enjoy. And so, yeah, so I applied for a few jobs, got really close 2 or 3 times. So it was one of the 3 or 4 finalists that got flown out to the campus. And yeah, and then the University of Massachusetts job opened up, and that's how I landed here. And what's a fun fact is that my wife and I were just sort of ready to get out of Colorado because it was sort of really developing, and you know, we knew we had some capital in our house, because it was just, by the time we bought our house, marijuana became legal and Google moved into town, and you know, like there was this whole sort of like booming happening. So we knew we had some capital in our house. So we thought, okay, well, if I don't get this job at UMass Amherst, we're going to move to Honolulu and open a coffee shop. That was the backup plan. And then I got the job at UMass, so now we'll never
Massachusetts, Honolulu, I don't know.
Yeah, so now we will never know the island lifestyle.
Yeah,
it's like, yeah.
Well, hey, vacation homes are a thing, so maybe that's always in your future.
Yeah, one can dream, right?
Right.
There's that HGTV, like where they show all those Hawaiian homes. What's the saying? Like, you don't have to what is it with Hawaii? Like, you just really have to want it, you know? It's not like you don't need to be able to afford it, you just really have to want it.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a little more complicated than that.
For people that want the beachfront home with a water view for, you know, for small pennies.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, could you talk a little bit more about where your passion for humanitarian issues come from? Because I think that's another big pillar of things that you're involved in. I mean, even if you go to your website, you're always really active, and you did do that campaign for #WeBringFlowers. But I think that's just, you know, a part of a lot of the stuff you've done. So where does that come from?
Yeah, so I mentioned one of the things I'm really grateful for growing up in South Africa is, you know, we have this nickname as the Rainbow Nation. And it's an amazing place to grow up. And so we have like 11 official languages, right? So it's so diverse and multicultural, and just a vibrant, rich country. And so I think what made a real impression on me is I sang in a youth choir at the inauguration of Nelson Mandela when apartheid ended and democracy started. Yeah. And I think I was 10 or 11 at that point. And it was just such a, I mean, joyous doesn't really encapture it, right? Or sort of capture it. It was joyous, but it was also hopeful. Whatever the word is, when you blend joyous and hopeful together, that's that's the word I'm looking for. But there was just so much optimism and energy around this amazing change, right? And I was lucky that I was sort of the first generation that really experienced the full benefits of democracy. And also then the flip side of that is sort of having parents and grandparents that was not the case for, right? And sort of like having those conversations of the difference between the two scenarios. So I think that planted a seed early on. And yeah, so We Bring Flowers project is something I did when, I mean, another shooting happened 2 weeks ago in Boulder.
Yeah.
But that was when mass shootings was really sort of only beginning. And there was this mass shooting in France that I was really sort of struggling with emotionally. And I saw this interview of a French reporter interviewing a 5-year-old boy. And the boy was sort of verbalizing to his dad that now they're going to have to leave Paris. There's bad guys everywhere. And he's really scared to be in Paris. And the dad said, well, you see all these people bringing flowers and candles as vigils. That is something that much more powerful than any weapon or any sense of violence could ever be. So I just found that really, I mean, such a great parenting moment, but also such a beautiful thought of that something like a flower can have so much more power than an assault rifle, you know? And so, yeah, so the idea was that, because like I said, I was struggling with it personally. And so I thought, well, I kind of want to see how composers deal with this sort of as a way to heal and work through it. And so I deliberately commissioned a wide variety of composers sort of that belong to the LGBTQIA plus community, a South African composer that's Black, a female composer, a composer that lives in the Deep South. I just really kind of want to see how people from various different backgrounds and sort of just environments that they live in every day, sort of how they handle the situation. And so the work that came out of that is great. I'm actually going to do a work from that project on the recital for Flute Center of New York. That's coming.
Perfect.
Yeah, and so I guess the work that most people probably know about is Court Dances by Amanda Harbour, because I did a huge consortium commission for it. And people from Brazil and China and the US and contributed. It's published by Presser. It's a great piece. And I also, what I like about it is sort of because the instructions to the composers were either compose something that sort of directly revolt against or confront societal violence. And Amanda sort of used physical exercise, sort of racquetball and things. So it's very high energy, and that's also what I liked about it. Not any of the pieces sound the same. There's like maybe one out of the bunch that seem really somber and dark, but also sort of like how all of these pieces have sort of this energetic or sense of optimism around them.
Do you immediately go to that place with music when something tragic happens, or these big issues or big traumas happen in our lives? I mean, is that an instantaneous thing that you turn to is music, or do you feel like you have a hard time kind of seeing its relevance at first? Like, this seems insignificant in all of the problems of the world.
That's a very, very good question. I think this is why I did the project, because I had a hard time actually finding that solace and that comfort in music, because it somehow felt bigger than music. So I think actually that's why, because I wanted to sort of draw that connection and I couldn't find it.
Yeah. Which is, I think, probably what a lot of people felt, especially over this last year too.
Yeah.
We've had a year with the pandemic, so I think people have come back around, but I know it was hard for a lot of people to find solace in music and to see the point in it, maybe. I mean, yeah. I'm sure there's some people that felt that way for a little bit of time.
Yeah, well, and if a large part of your identity is wrapped up in being a bassoonist or being a violinist, and all of that goes away, I can imagine it can feel really, really frightening, I guess.
I wanted to kind of delve into your studio too. As you had already mentioned, you're really passionate about teaching. You take it really seriously, but you seem like a very fun teacher too. You really you advocate for inclusivity, which is really great, and kind of a sense of belonging. So, what do you think the tools are that you give your students that help them move on into careers after they graduate?
Yeah. You know, I think the number one thing is acknowledging that you're not going to get it right always in terms of being inclusive and giving everybody a voice. And you try your best, but it's never going to be perfect, even though you want to tell yourself that it is. And I've had, even after trying my best, I've had a few moments where I was like, where I sort of realized, or where a student said something where I thought like, oh, I didn't know that was happening, or that was, and so you try your best, but I think if you just start from a place that everybody's trying, then you're already ahead. Rather than sort of pretending that you're this like little perfect bubble, right? And
is it hard to balance though, that sense of like fostering community and support and demanding excellence? I think that's hard.
Yeah, but I think also, and this is, I guess, in general how I live my life. Like, I don't think avoidance is good in any shape, way. It's, I think if you sort of avoid uncomfortable topics, or then it actually amplifies uncomfortable topics, and so the perfect example, I think, is we had a discussion recently about, with all the attacks on Asians recently in Atlanta. And there are two people in my studio that's Asian, and the music department at UMass did a big meeting to just sort of talk about the climate in the department. And something one of my students said that really is that I'm still sort of mulling over is how she said it's really painful when somebody, programs an entire program of BIPOC composers, but then in a social situation, when a microaggression arises, then they don't stand up or speak up for the issues that they believe in, right? And so sort of the way I interpreted that was, it was like, it's almost there's all this work that's happening, and all this sort of, the needle is definitely shifting, and all this awareness for social change and justice is of course incredible and wonderful. But when she said that, I thought, well, I have this fear that it's sort of now becoming like a hip trend, rather than I was really hopeful in that moment that people really understand the gravity of the situation, and so I just think, because that's sort of the environment that I grew up in, right? Like if you live through the end of apartheid, those conversations become normal, right? And conversations are only hard if you don't have them often. If the more you avoid a certain topic, the harder it becomes to talk about it, right? And so I guess my answer is like, how do I foster that? Is like, it's not that every studio class we talk about race, but I do want to, I do encourage, like when my students play in studio class, they have to talk about the composer in detail, right? And so let's say, for instance, somebody talks about a composer of color, like just saying this is a composer of color is not going to cut it for me, right? Like I really want them to sort of talk about their background, where they came from, what, that it becomes more of a normalized topic. I'm not sure if I answered your question. I kind of get way off.
It's okay. I mean, you guys are really close too. I mean, you're close with your studio. You do lots of things outside of just flute playing. You guys work out together. Is this true? And you're really active. I mean, you've talked about, you're pretty open about how you had some scary injuries, and they kind of opened your eyes to how it's really important to take care of ourselves as performers. We're kind of like athletes. And you've kind of ventured into chiropractic care, acupuncture. You've done a triathlon, right?
Yep.
Making everyone feel like slackers. So I guess, how has that really helped you in your playing? And how do you make sure that your students have access to stuff like that? Because that kind of care it's almost like a privilege for most of us.
Yeah. It's funny you said it because I'm about to go out on a bike ride after you and I speak, because I'm busy training for a full Ironman this summer in July.
Wow.
I'm hoping it'll happen, but we'll see. It was canceled last year. But yes, so to go back a little bit, in high school, I had a piano teacher who said to me once that if like you should basically practice until it really hurts between your shoulder blades, right? Like otherwise and I'm like, okay.
Wow.
In hindsight, that was terrible advice, but if you're a gullible middle schooler, you kind of do as you're told, right? So that sort of continued all the way through college, is that I just kind of thought, well, if I'm not pushing and playing to the point where it hurts, I haven't sort of done my work for the day, right? And so when I went to CU Boulder, they've got a wonderful musicians health initiative department. It's not just sort of like a afterthought, it's a real separate wing of their new building now, right? And they've got Alexander technique and body mapping, and they partnered with the Denver School of Massage, so you can sign up for a free massage every Thursday, right? So I ventured into or dipped my toes into all of those sort of things. But then when I graduated with my master's, my right shoulder blade was basically just fused, right? It was so, I couldn't move it. It was so sore. To the point where I thought, like, okay, I'm going to have to switch careers here, because I don't think my body can sustain this for an entire career. And so I happened to go to this festival, and there was a chiropractor there that did the scans, of inflammation. And he basically did a scan and said, yeah, we're not going to do anything here at my tent, but please come to my office so I can tell you how bizarrely messed up you are. So he took x-rays. My spine was off by 17 degrees. I had 3 degrees scoliosis. Just a lot of things wrong. Right now, who knows what came first? It's because I am 6'5". I did grow I grew a lot in a very short amount of time. And so who knows sort of what influenced what. But yeah, so I went on this whole journey with him, went 2 or 3 times a week, got traction. If you don't know what traction is, you basically hang with your head off the table with weights attached to your head. And it just basically resets your spine. And I became much better. And so then I eventually, like from there, I sort of got, because Boulder, Colorado is a great place for body work of any sort. So yeah, you name it. Like I've done roster stretching, rolfing, chiropractic care. Yeah, I mean, like any body work you can think of, cranial sacral therapy, like anything you can think of, I've done. And that's all wonderful, and you learn a little bit from each and every one of those disciplines. But the thing, and that's what so you mentioned we work out together as a studio. It's not every week. It's like, instead of having a cake at the end of the semester, I just take them all to this workout program, F45, that I belong to, which is like this really intense. Yeah. And so, and that's kind of actually my first question when somebody comes in. And I'm still actively working with Lee Pearson on body mapping. And I feel like I'm making strides of progress on a week-to-week basis, right? But that is one of the first questions I ask my students when they come in and they say, oh, this is sore, this hurts. I ask them, like, well, how active are you, right? And I'm not saying you have to be an Olympic bodybuilder. That's not what I'm saying at all. But if the only movement you're doing is movement that goes this way, right? Like that cannot be healthy for your body. Yeah, and so I just I've always had this dream of doing a full Ironman, and then kind of just sort of dipped my toes in the water with it. And I fell in love with swimming, because swimming is just like flute playing. It's so technical, and just you have to be so aware of every movement of your body. It's more about technique than the actual sport. And there's a great swim coach here in the Valley, and yeah, so it sort of just snowballed, I guess. But yeah, I do think it is very important to, not just for the lungs, but for your just general health and your body wellness. I think it is important to just stay active and keep moving.
Yeah. Well, and then on the other side of things, you have physical health and then your mental health. That's another thing that you've been open about, is that you had a lot of performance anxiety, and you sought the help of some coaches, and
Yeah. So fun fact: there's a I think it was Stanford, but you have to double check me on that. Just released a study about a year or two ago about PTSD in war veterans. And the thing that they found that was most helpful with treating PTSD, this is above any medication, above any other treatment, is very intense cardiovascular exercise, which I found fascinating. So yes, I think that does play a role in it too. But so as far as the performance anxiety goes, a couple of years ago, I felt like when I had performances, it took me a while to get into the performance, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily that I was anxious in a certain way that some people are, like with shaking and being short of breath and sweating profusely. Like that was sort of not how it manifested for me. For me, it was more sort of like disassociation in a way. It's almost like I sort of like didn't care. I had this like, all right, I'm here, like sort of this blasé attitude until about sort of like 10, 15 minutes into the concert, when I sort of would really sort of get into it, right? So I just always felt like the first 10 or 15 minutes was really lackluster in my performances. So I went to Helen Spielman, did a bunch of work with her, and just really, this idea of positive affirmations is really powerful. And it's funny because when people hear that word, and when I talk about this to my students, the usual response is sort of like, well, I can't just tell myself I'm wonderful when I don't think I'm wonderful, right? And that is the beauty of positive affirmations. It's not fooling yourself, right? It's coming up with an affirmation that you believe is actually 100% true, and it replaces that negative thought, right? Because our brains are wired, 8 out of 10 thoughts are negative, whether it is like, I wish this pancake was, or whatever, this donut was sweeter, these pants were a little bit looser, but we're geared towards negativity, right? But it's also, neuroscience is a fascinating topic that I'm really interested in, and you can really rewire your entire brain, which is really fascinating and interesting.
Yeah. Have you read that book, You Are a Badass?
No, I'm gonna.
Yeah, you should. Yeah, I just read that recently, and it's there's a lot of it is kind of along the same lines of, we construct our own realities, and what we tell ourselves kind of becomes reality. And the more you tell yourself something, the more you start to believe it, and then it does manifest itself, just because you're open to it instead of always saying the negative thoughts all the time.
Yeah,
check it out. It's right along those lines. Or
absolutely.
The studio.
I can't wait.
So have you been busy at all this last year with any additional projects?
Well, I've been busy homeschooling my 3rd grader, so I can do the multiplication tables cold at any time of day. So I'm working on a few projects. The one I'm really excited about is, this is actually more research based than performance based, but I received a grant. Very often in master classes that I would attend, the master or the person teaching would refer to energy zones or chakras or parts of the body to activate or deactivate, and I'm always fascinated by that, because it always seems to have an influence, but I'm always interested in if that's sort of like a placebo effect, or if it's if there's actually real science behind it, right? So I got a grant where I purchased hand-beaten Tibetan singing bowls for each chakra of the body. And I am partnering up with a professor in the sciences, and I'm basically going to use my students as lab rats, and expose them. It'll be a double-blind study. They'll be hooked up to a bunch of different things, and but just kind of expose them to, without telling them this is your heart chakra or this is your crown chakra, right? Just exposing them to it, having them play a tone, measuring sort of the amplitude, the decibel level, the amount of time they can hold it, then exposing them to a certain sound if from the singing bowl for a certain amount of time. You know,
I think there's a commission somewhere in there for a.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you read my mind. There is,
Yeah.
that's sort of the next step is like,
Very good.
yeah. Yeah, so that's sort of, it's more research based, I guess, what I'm sort of doing next. But I'm excited about it.
And you had another big project kind of to wrap up this year or be released within the last year. This is your Naxos recording project.
Yeah.
You recorded all of Castored's flute works. That took the span of what, three?
Yes, 3.5, almost 4 years. Yeah.
So what was that editing process like? How did your playing change from like day one of recording versus close to release date?
Yeah. That was, maybe that's why I'm doing more research-based things for a while.
Take a break.
You know, it's been something I've been wanting to do for a really long time, right? And it's just, I fell in love with this composer. We all know, the first time I encountered Castored was in my senior year of my undergraduate, where I got assigned to play the Flute Unscripted, the flute quartet that we all know and love, right? And then a few years later, in Boulder, the quintet I mentioned earlier, we played his quintet, and I liked that just as much. And so over the years, as I've gone to the conventions and I've accumulated all the scores, and after a while I literally had like a stack of Castored scores, this thing that I've just never played and I was always curious about. And then after researching him some more, I also found out that he actually composed a piece for the Premier Prix exam at the Paris Conservatory. So then that sort of like piqued my interest even more, right? And it is sort of sad in a way because he passed away in 2014, I think. So the overlap of when I sort of could have actually been in contact with him is so close, right? But life circumstances just didn't make it happen that way, I guess. Yeah, but so what was that process like? It was just a lot of planning. Some scores are rental, some are not in print at all. So the last CD has a great quartet for, that's the same as the Bolling suite, the jazz trio with flute. And then there's a second flute quartet that uses all the way from piccolo to contrabass flute. But those, on his website, it says incomplete and not published. And then Troy, who, you know, he told me that, oh, no, but he has a book from Castored that says it has been performed. So then I'm like, okay, so now I have to find this, right? So I got in touch with his widow. His widow went through his entire study, found the handwritten scores that's like not very easily readable. So I had to get somebody to put that into music notation. You know, and then also it's sort of this whole thing of, because it's all different chamber musics and different chamber music settings and different musicians that have to fly from all over the country, because I'm sort of like pulling in favors from friends, you know. And so it was a very good process to learn what goes into contract negotiation, royalty, you know, just booking space, just being organized for one. But then also just sort of like getting to know a composer, because this is works that, you know, span like many years, you know, many decades actually, right? And so just as my playing changed as I was recording over 3 years, yeah, it's interesting to see sort of like how his compositional style changed, and then you have to decide which track goes on which CD, and it's just and how to convince Naxos to actually publish it, because that was the only label that I was sort of interested in, because that's sort of what they do, right? Like it and so just getting that taken care of was the biggest headache, you know.
How'd you
Yeah, so
convince
it was,
them in the end?
we'll say again.
How'd you convince them in the end?
Um, if you want to know the real truth, I just went to the big boss because I wasn't getting responses from other people. So I was like, but see, that's I was emailing all the quote unquote right people, and I just wasn't getting feedback or the response that I needed. And so I just emailed the CEO and I just said, I want to do this project. And then within like an hour, I had an answer from the people that I needed to get an answer from. But yeah, so it was a really amazing learning curve. I grew a lot, especially the etudes. The etudes are really difficult if you play them at the tempos. That was the thing. Like I wanted to. That's also why it took 3.5 years, because I didn't want to rush it and just sort of like have it out there to have it out there. But I really wanted to do the music justice. So if he wrote, 164 for the quarter, like I was going to try my very best to get to 164 for the quarter,
because you're like your recording is a reference now. I mean,
so it was fascinating, and it's great because now I have a new flute, so it's something to look back on and be like, oh, that was my old flute. Oh yeah, my new flute can't really do that. Like my new flute sound it's sort of, it's a nice little memory in in the past.
If he was still around today and you could ask for his guidance or ask him any question, what would you talk to him about?
It's funny because in the process of trying to find these scores, especially the ones that's not published, I pretty much spoke to every living, breathing flute player in Paris, and finally got to Martine, his widow, and every single person that got back to me, the very first of all, I was very grateful that I had 5 years of French in high school, because I don't know how I would have gotten through this if I didn't. I was very broken French, but every single person that responded back to me, like their opening line was something always along the same vein of, oh, Mr. Castorade was the most wonderful man. Like, oh, he had such an amazing sense of humor. Oh, he had, and so, and I think that's also why I'm drawn to his music. Like it just seems like we would be fast friends, if that makes sense. Because out of experience commissioning people, composers I am really drawn to. They sort of write like they are. I don't know if that's the right sentence construction, but their personality really shines through in their music, right? And so usually people I commission, I end up becoming really good friends with, because it's sort of I can just tell we're going to get along, I guess.
Yeah, you probably ask him to tell you a joke if you saw him.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I also would kind of ask him, because he had, he won prizes. I guess I would ask him is, why aren't you, because, if you look at his dates, there are other composers in the flute repertoire that achieved a lot more fame and notoriety, if you would, so I guess I would kind of pick his brain about how he just went about, and I think I know what the answer would be, because it's just about the music, it's not about the fame, but it's I'm just always curious, like why he didn't push harder for, to get his work out there.
Right. Well, I bet he'd be really proud of your project. And you said you recorded some of it with your new flute. Can you?
No, I only got my new flute about a month ago, actually.
Oh my goodness. How has it been?
It's good. I just recorded. Yes, I just recorded for the Bach Festival at UMass Amherst. I had to record the partita and the BWV 1079, the trio sonata. I think it's 1079. And it's interesting because it's like it's going on a first date with somebody, like I think I know this flute, and then you get in the recording session and you're like, oh, okay, that response. We all sort of have our comfort zones, right? where you know what'll work in what scenario, and then you go into that zone and you're like, oh, the flute is not, because it's a different flute, the flute is not reacting the way. So it was sort of an interesting experiment, but I do love this instrument a lot. And it's I think I finally found the instrument that gives me everything I'm looking for, you know.
Yeah, well,
I feel like I have to compromise.
Yeah, people are probably curious what we're talking about. It's a Haynes, right? A Haynes.
Yes, I'm a Haynes artist, and I've been playing a Haynes fusion out for many years. And then a few years ago, I kept the fusion out body, but I switched to a 19.5K gold head joint. And then I finally sort of took the plunge and or I should say, I found a buyer for my for my fusion out body.
Is that hard to let go of, like, your old baby, the instrument that kind of got you through so much? Was that hard to let go?
You know, not for me. And it's, I guess it's just sort of like in sync with, I'm a firm believer that everything in life is directional, right? You're either moving forward or you're moving backwards. I don't think there is a stagnant, right? If you feel like you're stagnant, you're probably moving backwards, is my philosophy, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, it's like, there's a reason why I fell in love with the 19.5K. And yes, we have great memories together with the old flute in Russia, and, you know, like where, like all the places I've traveled. And I have this Custard Red CD project that I recorded on it. And, but at the end of the day, it's like, you know, I'm always looking for what's next, I guess. I'm very adventurous in that way, I think. So for me, and the thing is too, it's a private student that bought it. So it sort of stays in the family. If that makes sense.
Exactly. Pass it down. That's nice.
Yeah. Well, so now I just have now I'm playing just old 19.5K.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to your performances and to hearing you on that flute. And thank you so much for joining me today. It was really great to get to chat with you and get to know you better. And
absolutely.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get to see you someday soon in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Caity.
You're very welcome. All right, bye-bye.
Alrighty.